Nicole, are we ready and back? Set. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the staff meeting. This morning, I know that we have 3 items on the agenda. We'll start with the sheriff, then we have election update, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the bell tower out front. It's looked pretty bad for some time. See if we can come up with a proposed solution. So, Mr. Manager, do you have anything else?
That's it, sir. We'll go ahead and start with the sheriff.
Sounds good. Sheriff Easter, welcome.
Good morning, Commissioners. I've received texts from some of you in reference to the abortion protests that have been going on in the city since Friday night. There has been a protest every day or every night, Friday through yesterday. The very first one was out at 21st and Tyler. The other ones have been centered around the federal courthouse, the city building, and the county building. There was probably about 300 protesters from both sides last night here around the city building and the county building. We're meeting, or have been meeting, with the police department to have a plan in place for any major protests that might come before August 2nd. That plan includes dealing with the protesters in the field, and then if there are arrests, how we're going to go about transporting and detaining those folks. And so those plans are set in motion, both from the police department and the sheriff's office. They're meeting this morning at 9 to start going over how we're going to respond to kind of these pop-up protests. We're not getting a lot of intelligence on any of this stuff, and so it's just kind of a wait and see type of game to see where one side or the other, or both sides, come together in one location. There was a few incidents last night where people threw water bottles at each other. Some vehicles drove through with vote no or vote yes signs that caused some minor, very minor disturbances where stuff was thrown. So what our job in law enforcement is to do is to make sure that those are peaceful protests and that both sides are able to voice their opinion of what they have. And so we're not there to pick sides or anything else. It's simply to maintain a safe arena for them to be able to peacefully protest. So that's all I really have right now. There is not, like I said, hardly any intelligence coming in whatsoever on any of these issues.
Super, I appreciate the update. Any questions from commissioners? I don't see any. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
Please keep us posted. Thank you. Okay. Angela? Welcome.
Good morning, Angela Cadillo, your Sedgwick County Election Commissioner, here today with an election update. First thing I'll talk about is upcoming elections. So we have 3 coming up. Obviously, the August 2nd primary and special question submitted election. This August, all registered Sedgwick County voters will have the opportunity to cast a ballot in this question, or in this election. Typically, primaries are partisan, and you have a Republican ballot and a Democratic ballot, and any unaffiliated voters could affiliate on election day to cast a ballot. But this time around, with that special question submitted election, that constitutional amendment, any registered voter in Sedgwick County will have an opportunity to cast a ballot. Typically, turnout for statewide primaries, midterms, is 15 to 30%. We are not entirely sure what to expect. We are preparing for up to 65% turnout. We think we might be closer to the 50% number, but we obviously want to over-prepare just in case. And then August 30th, we have a very small special election for USD 394, that is Rose Hill Public Schools. There are some voters in Sedgwick County that have that are part of the Rose Hill Public School District. And so we will have one polling place in Sedgwick County for that election. And then November 8th, the general election, that is the second Tuesday in November. We are preparing for around a 75% turnout, and the typical turnout is around 50% in a midterm. Just a reminder that in Sedgwick County, voters have three opportunities, three ways they can cast their vote. Advance by mail is open to all Sedgwick County residents. They can vote in person early, either in the election office or at one of our satellite centers, or on election day at their assigned polling place. And then just to take a quick look at voter registration, this is of yesterday afternoon. I ran these numbers, 324,175. So typically we fluctuate between presidential and non-presidential years. The trend goes up, but sometimes it can be a total loss. We are already past what our total voter registration was at the time of the general for 2020, which was around 322,000. Anecdotally, I will say that recent events, I believe, have caused a spike in voter interest and activity. Since Friday morning, we have received 2,500 new electronic registrations. So that's either coming in through electronic through our KS Votes email box. KS Votes is an organization that allows people to register online or request advance by mail ballots. And then through our motor voter, what we call, which is the electronic registrations through the DMV. So that's a total of electronic. We've received about 2,200 emails in that KS Votes box. That's about half voter registration and half request for advance by mail ballot. So we are busy working evenings, working weekends to try and get that cleared and get those ready for Election Day. A real quick redistricting recap. A shout out to your fantastic GIS team. We got the maps from Legislative Research, and with our GIS partnership, we got started on those. Jack Joseph, Jeff Wright, and Mahinda Abikun provided us fantastic information and tools to get those things going. That was headed up by our Chief Deputy, Don Harris, and then Mike Auburn in our office, and several other staff worked on that. As you can see, approximately 150,000 voters in Sedgwick County were affected. So we will be sending out to them a notice of disposition. That's the white postcard that you get in the mail. It's a certificate of voter registration, and it basically says what your districts are, where your polling place is, things of that nature. So we are required to send those out when there's been a change, and we're getting ready to send those out. I plan to work with communications to make that known so people will understand why those are coming out at this time. And so a total of 238 precincts were either changed or created by redistricting. So then I wanted to talk about historical mail voting in Sedgwick County. I know the question has been mentioned several times. There's been interest from commissioners about what the cost of an advance mailer is, what the opportunities would be to not do that or do something different. So I wanted to address that today and let you know what I've been looking at. I'm sorry these numbers are so small, but historically what I understand is that in 2006 there were long lines at the polling places, and we believe that was created by a significant reduction in polling places. It's my understanding that as a response to that, in 2008, an advance by mail mailer was sent out. So it was an application that allowed people to go ahead and go ahead and request a mail ballot. And that's mailed typically to all active registered voters in the county. And so you can see here in the general, you've got your total ballots and your by mail percentage. And as you go through 2008 to 2020, you see around between 30 to 40%. These are general numbers. Typically, the mailer is sent out prior to the general election, so between the primary election and the general election. So my question is trying to figure out, if we were not to send out a mailer, how might that affect voters' behavior as far as voting is concerned. When we plan an election, our logistics are planned based on our predictions. Our predictions come from history, and to the best of my knowledge, this is the history we have. So I wondered, since we started, are these numbers a function of the mailer that goes out, or are they a function of people just in general changing how they vote? Because both things are possible, and there's a combination of both. So I wanted to take a look at what primary voting looks like as far as mail percentage, and it's significantly lower most of the time. In 2020, that asterisk is because they actually sent out, we actually sent out an advance mailer before the primary, so it actually included two separate applications for the primary and for the general. And as I looked a little further, I could see that the mail percentage is here, and when you look at the early percentage, it is about, there was one year that it hit 30%, but it's about 10 to 15% for early in person, which would mean that the rest of the voters are going to the polling place. So when we consider whether or not we're going to do a mailer, we need to consider how that may affect our polling places, how that may affect voters' experience on Election Day. So that's what I've been looking at there. And so, as I mentioned, commissioners indicated that they would like some additional information. Commissioner Cruz, I know you specifically asked me to look at a postcard and what some other things might look like. So here's a couple of things that we did consider. The advance application plus the information on other voting methods is going to cost around we anticipate $30,000 to $50,000 in design and print, and then another $92,000 in postage to mail to all registered Sedgwick County voters. Okay, and so the NOD we talked about a little bit. That's that postcard that we're sending out already to the 150,000 voters that have been affected. We thought, well, if we're already sending out to 150,000 voters, what if we changed the back of that postcard, gave some information on ways to vote, and then instead of sending it out just to those people, send it out to everyone? That is a $60,000 postage expenditure that we're already required to undertake. So that's going to happen whether we make a change or not. We anticipate it'd be another $70,000 to send one of those notices to the rest of the county. And the reason it costs that is because those notices have to go out specifically in a certain way. They have to go out return service, requested, and so they are a little more expensive. They will be 44 cents as of, I think, the 10th or 11th of July. We also looked at what an informational postcard would look like to all registered voters or households. We anticipate $27,000 to $30,000 in design and print, and still the $92,000 in postage to send to every registered voter. And that's because the pre-sort standard mail rate is the same whether it's a postcard or a full mailer. And that's why the postage is the same for the advance application and that informational postcard. We do think we could reduce it if we householded the mailing and sent one postcard per household. Probably, I don't have those numbers, but we think we could reduce it maybe up to a maximum of about 25%. And then we could look at alternative advertising methods. We could do significant advertising with significantly reduced costs. We could do a lot of advertising with just that $27,000. I checked with communications and looked at some of the advertising that they had been doing for COVID. And so there are some opportunities for advertising, whether it's social media, television, or radio. We would just need to work very closely with our media buyers to make sure that we were hitting all demographics. So this is an example of the proposed redesign for the notice of disposition. Right now, it's kind of, it just has some information on the back and an address. And we worked with Robin Fertner in communications. We value our partnership with communications. They do a lot of work for us and a lot of help. So shout out to Robin. She did this on a really short turnaround for us. But this is what we would anticipate that the notice of disposition back would be redesigned. We would have to get approval from the Secretary of State's office. I did speak with SOS office to verify that a redesign would be possible. It is possible. We would just have to get the approval. So that's what that would look like. And potentially any postcard we would send out, we would anticipate to have some of these aspects as well. And then finally, just wanted to give you an update regarding increased costs, because it wouldn't be me if I didn't come and talk about money a little bit. So envelopes this year have approximately doubled in cost per piece. We have spent a lot of money on envelopes. We were unable to use our regular contracted vendor. They were unable to secure the supplies. The mills are not releasing paper. Specifically, envelopes are harder to get than regular paper. So we did use another contracted vendor with whom we have a relationship. That vendor is in Topeka, so we also added shipping costs, but that was a large expenditure that we made. There is an increased need for supplies because more voters are eligible to vote in the primary election than typically would be. We do believe we've secured adequate envelope stock and ballot stock for 2022. We went ahead and ordered that proactively. We wanted to make sure that we had what we needed to serve our voters. But we do still anticipate high costs for other election supplies. And then the postage increase for regular first-class mail is going from 58 cents to 60 cents per piece, and our metered cost then would go from 55 cents to 57 cents. So just a little increase there. One other thing I'll say is that you will see me in early July. I will be coming before the Board of County Commissioners to go ahead and formally ask for funding for our 401 pull pad replacement. Originally, we had wanted to ask for additional pull pads, but we have removed that request and are only asking for the necessary replacement for this 401. So you'll see us there. Shout out for any people who would like to work elections. We still do need some election workers. We have 454 confirmed for Election Day and 110 confirmed for early voting. At a minimum, we need to add 48 to 50 more to fill all of our slots. We would like to add 125 additional so we can have some roving teams for support. Again, we're not sure what polling place turnout is going to look like this election, so we want to be prepared and give voters the best experience possible. And I'm ready to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this presentation. I would like some more information around the alternative advertising methods and what exactly that would cost. I've heard this commission speak about not being in favor of wanting to send anything out in the mail other than what's absolutely required. And although I do favor sending something out in the mail to constituents, I also would like to have the actual cost of what the alternative advertising methods would cost us. So if you could bring that back to us. One thing you didn't mention or discuss was, and thank you, Sheriff, for being here today, because this is going to be a contentious election on August the 2nd. And so I would like to just briefly touch on electioneering laws and how your office plans to enforce those laws, and if your office isn't going to do it, who is responsible to do it. On our website, it says, if a person refuses to leave or stop electioneering, the polling place owner or the owner's representative or the polling place official may contact the election commissioner or, if necessary, call 911 for law enforcement assistance. I've noticed here that we have 82 assigned polling locations. Of those 82 locations, many of those are churches. Churches are not required to follow the advertising laws because this is a constitutional amendment, so you will find many churches that have the Vote Yes big banners in their yards. So how do we plan to stop electioneering of those polling places? How do you plan to enforce that?
That is a great question, Commissioner, and I did anticipate that. We've actually received some questions in our office as well. So I will start by saying you are correct. Out of our polling places, 58 of them are churches. I'll start by saying that they are private property, so anytime up to and before an election, they are free to do whatever they are going to do like any other private property owner. We cannot restrict that. Electioneering is something that happens during active voting. And a person cannot be on site in a polling place advocating for any position or any candidate, nor can they be within 250 feet of an entrance to the polling place. So that's a very interesting point, because the entrance, the way it's calculated, is not the entrance from the street. It's the actual entrance, the door that the voter walks in. So we do have maps that we give our supervising judges that show that area. And it's not always what you would think. It is possible that some of the marquees that are on a church property might be outside of that 250 feet radius. The reason that may be is because in order to be a polling place, there's a 10-page checklist for ADA, and the specific door has to meet specific criteria. And so a door may be around the back side, or a door may be on the left side. So depending on where that entrance is where that radius is. That said, we have sent a notice to all of our polling places. We do remind them about electioneering laws. We have asked them to be cognizant of that and verify that there are no signs or marquees within that area. We do hope that our polling places will use good judgment in doing that, but if anything is within that area, our supervising judges would pull signs. If there are people, the supervising judges would remove them, and if they're not able to remove them, I would attempt to have them leave, and if I can't get them to leave, then we would call law enforcement. It is up to law enforcement to enforce that law if we call them.
So the law enforcement in the jurisdiction where the polling
Correct.
place is at. So if it's in Wichita, it's WPD.
Correct.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge, I will say. To the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
Okay. So you said there's 58 of those places, and there's how many? So you say one door. Wouldn't it be every door that you would go into?
So no, it's whatever is designated as the entrance. And if you have any questions about any specific polling places, I'd be happy to show you. I was actually surprised when I saw that, but it's not every entrance. It's the entrance in which the voter enters.
Can you get me that statute that says that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Other questions for Angela? Again, just to follow up on the last question, for example, during my last campaign, my opponent had signs out along Central, and the polling place was St. Elizabeth, but that was legal because along Central was a long way away from the entrance. So that is still legal, correct?
Yes, and it is shocking to voters and frustrating for voters and candidates. So we do receive a lot of calls every election day asking that question. Usually homeowners and people who have signs that are within the 250 feet radius are really good about it. They know if they forget to pull it, they know somebody's going to come and pull it the morning of the election. But yes, there are some churches that we've used in the past that have a very long drive. And technically, if the private property allowed it, there could be signs on that drive. Again, we do ask, so we have worked with polling places in the past to ask them, is it possible to remove those things? Because we know it does upset voters, it upsets candidates, and it's concerning to people. But ultimately, if it's on private property and it doesn't fall within that 250-foot radius, we have to rely on them to make that decision.
Okay, very good. Well, I didn't object to those because I realized that they were far enough away from the entrance. So, but some of my supporters were objecting, and I had to tell them it is fine. Don't worry about it. It's perfectly legal. Oh, Sheriff.
You mind if I add something?
Certainly.
So, in reference to the jurisdiction question, we have jurisdiction there as well. The last time that, let's see, it was the Trump-Biden election, we were expecting possibly some issues there. So we paired up in vehicles with the police department, and we had 12 roving patrols around those election areas. We're making plans to do that this time too. So that there is issues, it's a quick phone call. We have designated 24 people to respond to those issues right away.
Yeah, thanks, Sheriff. Other questions? Commissioner Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just first point, I'd say it's KSA 25-2430A is the statute. So 25-2430A. I'm looking at some of the election participation numbers from previous elections. I would say the 2020 presidential would be right now is the highest I think we've ever seen in probably almost any jurisdiction. And gubernatorials typically are less than that. You said 75%. That would be in excess of about 5% higher than the presidential we had last time. Is there some thought as to why we would expect such a high number?
We're preparing for 65%, Commissioner. We expect about 50%, but we're preparing for 65 because we just don't have any history on what a primary with a constitutional amendment looks like. We want to just make sure that we have enough.
Okay. I had a couple of other questions here. Did you say GIS is, the maps are updated, or what's the status of GIS for the
Oh, I'm
precincts?
sorry. I should have mentioned that. GIS is working on those. We have a goal date of July 8th to get those pushed out with the new districts and all of the people listed with those districts. Our data is up to date, however, so
So
our
voter
voter
registration date is correct for
Correct.
Sedgwick County. Is it,
Yeah.
how about the Secretary of State's office? Is it also correct there?
So our voter registration data is correct at the Secretary of State's office. So they have the same data that we have for our voter registration. I'm not certain about all of the other 104 counties, however.
And you said July the 8th is when we can expect those maps to be correct.
We are hoping to have all those updates pushed out by July the 8th.
And that's only about 3 weeks before the election. And voting starts on what day? July.
I have that for you.
About 2 weeks or so before the election.
We start sending out early ballots on the 13th, and early voting in person at the election office begins on July 18th.
I guess I would just say, I know it's not anyone's fault, but it's really not ideal to have maps that are updated on July the 8th when mail ballots are going out literally less than a week later. So that's the whole schedule this year is compressed in a way that really is not good for anybody really. And talk about disenfranchisement. If candidates can't get their message to the right people, those people may not know much about those candidates, and so we're expecting them to potentially. And of course, this year there's not very many primary races, and so I don't know that's that big of a deal really. But fundamentally, it's just not a good situation to have. And so I hope the state of Kansas, or whatever the process is, would try to find a way to change this schedule next time so we're not in this situation ever again. So
It is certainly a tight timeline, and I am not sad that it will be 10 more years.
did you say that the early in person can be up to 30%? Is that what you said?
So what I have seen in looking at past elections, because I anticipated this question might come up, if we weren't sending a mailer and the vote by mail was only that 15%, what was the early in person? And the numbers I have showed that the early in person was somewhere between 10 and 15% typically, but there was one election that it was 30%. And that's starting in 2006. And I did not have good early in-person numbers for the 2018 primary.
Do you know what year that 30% happened? Because I'd like to know, between the mail and the early in-person together is kind of an interesting number to know. So those two things together is an interesting takeaway. So if mail's higher, I would assume that the early in-person is a little bit lower, and vice versa. But I'd like to be able to look at those numbers and know that for sure.
I will check that for you. I apologize. I thought I added that column this morning, and I thought I printed it, but I did not.
Okay. In terms of the all demographics, if you send out, you said caution must be taken to reach all demographics. If we were to use advertising, how do we assess that? I mean, what's the strategy on? Are we going to target certain populations to make sure they get the message? And I mean, are we kind of weighting our messaging in certain areas, or are we just simply broadcasting equally? And are we how is that measured? And who makes the determination that we're doing this in a whatever this goal is, trying to make sure we're fair? How do we assess that?
Commissioner, that's my question as well, and I would rely on experts in the field and communications. and the media buyers to kind of guide us in that way. I know that some of our communication staff here has some experience with that, but I don't know how to guarantee it. And I think in elections, it's really important that everyone is treated equally and with an equal opportunity. And so when I think about mailing versus advertising, those are the kinds of things that I think about. Everyone who's registered is going to get a postcard or a application in their mailbox if we send it there. I don't know how to guarantee that every person who's a registered voter will hear an advertisement, see an advertisement, or have that equal exposure.
Okay, but we still advertise even if we do send out the mail-in. The advertising still happens, maybe to a different degree. But there's all kinds of advertising comes out from the county as well as other radio media and TV media. That all kinds of things are out there that would tell people there's opportunity to vote and how to vote and how to register. Those information pieces come from all kinds of sources, including Sedgwick County. So even if we sent out the mailer, I don't know that we would stop advertising. So there's a potential. I guess there's potential that someone could receive more messages than someone else, or they might be more responsive, and the way they got it maybe be more effective than somebody else didn't get that same message. And so there's always a risk that would happen. We are going to continue to advertise as we always have, I assume.
I don't know that we'll do any paid advertisements if we do a mailer. I would imagine that any earned media, I would speak about the ways to vote, and we would potentially do some social media posts. I don't know if they would be paid. Okay,
and then let's say the $60,000 is already required for the postage. Is that because of the folks that have registered in the last couple of years? They get a mailer to let them know where to vote. Is that? You said $60,000 is already required. Another $70,000 to send to the rest of the county. Please explain that more. I guess I understand this. I think I understand the 60, but maybe I'm wrong. So
sure. No, that goes back to. That goes back to the notice of disposition. Because of redistricting, we are required to send a notice of disposition to anyone whose representation changed. That being about 150,000 registered voters in Sedgwick County, the postage calculates out to about $60,000. So whether we change the back of that notice of disposition or not, whether we do any other advertising or send anything else out, we are mailing to 150,000 voters as required by law. If we were to make that an equal mailing and send it to everyone so that they got this back of that postcard in their hands, it would be approximately an additional $70,000 in postage alone. There are obviously costs to the clicks for the printing and the supplies.
So when you register to vote, you get a notification saying, here, you're registered to vote, and here's your districts.
Correct.
This card will not have the districts listed. Look at that example, does not show the districts.
When we're talking about the notice of disposition, it will have the districts listed.
So it would not be like this then?
That it would be the back of the card.
Okay, so the other side does have detailed information for each address.
Correct. The other option would be to do just a regular postcard to everyone that didn't have districts, and that would be a lower postage cost because we could send that at that $92,000 rate.
I'm just curious, but in Sedgwick County, there's only one precinct that I'm aware of that has a primary for a state house position. And there's some statewide positions, but I'm not sure there's any. I don't know how many primaries there are. So for those areas, they have primary elections. They might have a very specific ballot for where they go. But otherwise, there's really nothing to choose in most of the positions. I mean, they're just choice of one in most cases. So I guess I'm just saying that the demographic information may be less important this time for most places because there's not a choice to be made.
That's an excellent point, Commissioner. Typically, for any mailings or advertising, we would do that between the primary and the general. If we went the route of sending the notice of disposition, we would go ahead and do it as soon as possible because by law we need to get those notices that are required out. But otherwise, if we did a postcard or a mail application or advertising, our plan would be to do it between the primary and the general, as has been typical in previous years.
Okay, I guess just one question and one comment. So we are the only county in the state of Kansas, as far as we know, that does this advanced election office application sent out to all voters. I think we're the only county in Kansas that does that. Is that correct?
I don't have that information. I believe in my conversation with other election commissioners, there was at least one other county that did, but I am not positive. I would have to check on that.
Yeah, so it's my understanding we're the only ones that does that. So I guess want to make that point. I guess I would rather, to me, that's a very important point. And the last thing I'll just say this, I'm not grammar police, but I do see a typo on your card. So if I'll tell you about that later.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. I just received a question around the placement of political signs during the election period. Is that something you could just cover real fast? I'll just read the
Potentially.
statute. Here it says, it's 2019 statute 25-2711, placement of political signs during election period. No city or county shall regulate or prohibit the placement of or the number of political signs on private property or the unpaved right-of-way for city streets or county roads on private property during the 45-day period prior to an election and the 2-day period following any such election. Cities and counties may regulate the size and a setback distance for the placement of signs as not to impede sight lines or sight distance for safety measures. Can anybody point me to the direction of what the city of Wichita or this ancillary cities in our county say about such setback guidelines?
Commissioner, on our website, we do have a letter from the city of Wichita. I have received an updated letter from the city of Derby that is typically the letter that they give out to candidates, I believe. I do need to replace the one on the website from the city of Derby, but that might give you some information, as well as I think MABCD would, or code enforcement would hold the rest of the information. Does that sound correct, Mr. Manager?
I know that they've had discussion about right-of-way placement for years, and I think with the state law in 2019, I think that the city adhered to the right-of-way placement. So we'll get with the city and get more information to commissioners on that question.
Okay, and can we just make that really readily available on our own website? That way it's easily accessible, and there's a lot of questions around that. I want to make sure people are following the guidelines and it's easy to find where those are at.
Absolutely, Commissioner. I anticipate a lot of questions involving not only that, but the other questions you spoke about as far as signage on polling places. And so I'm hoping to put together something that's a quick click from the front of our webpage so people can get information.
Thanks, appreciate that.
Commissioner Howell.
Yeah, I agree with what you just said. The city of Wichita has a letter on your website, actually, and it talks about that. But they clearly state that they prohibit signs on rights-of-way on public property. And this has been a debate between the city of Wichita and the state. And so there's going to be lawsuit at some point to clean this up. But Wichita takes a position in opposition to the state law, and they know it. It's obviously a conflict, and it hasn't been resolved yet. So anybody who's in Wichita that places a sign understand that Wichita does take a position under constitutional home rule theory in opposition to the state law, and they are very aware that they're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. One last question. One of your slides says that the current registration is 324,175 people. Out of that 324,175,000, how many of them do you think don't know that we've got an election coming up on August the 2nd?
That's a good question. I would imagine probably the majority of them know, but it's hard to tell. I guess we'll see with turnout.
Well, yeah, they have to not watch any TV, they can't listen to the radio, they can't drive down the street, or they would know that there's an election coming up on August the 2nd. So how much is it worth to the county for the taxpayers to send out this notice when everybody already knows there's an election coming up?
It is very expensive mailing, I will give you that. Again, when we look at whether or not to send the mailing, we're trying to determine how voters might respond if we don't. Because we're not certain. We always have, and our logistics, our plans are built upon our predictions, which are built upon what we've done in the past. I will say that if we are to send out a mailing, it will take support from the Board of County Commissioners. I know that there was $100,000 additional added to the mailroom budget for postage for elections for 2022. It is not my understanding that that was added for a mailer. It's my belief that that was added for printing of ballots and for mailing of advance ballots because we obviously see an increase of those in statewide election years. But my current budget, as I've told you, we have had a lot of paper costs. We don't have the budget and budget authority at this time to support a mailing independently in that budget. So anything we do has to be a partnership.
I agree. I appreciate that. But the way we stand right now, there's either 104 or 103 other counties that don't do this. And so how many of them are watching TV, not paying attention, that they would have needed this? I just don't understand why Sedgwick County is the only one that doesn't know that there's an election coming up.
Well, again, I don't think it's that they don't know. I think it is how voters are going to respond if we don't do it. And will they still have an opportunity to vote?
So the voters in other counties are going to respond differently than Sedgwick County?
If we've typically sent out a mailer that allows people to apply and send that back, and that doesn't happen, the question is, will there be a major difference in the polling place turnout? And if there is, how will that affect lines and how will that affect those things? It's not so much that people don't know. It is, if we don't do what we've done in the past, what changes can we expect and how do we prepare for that and what risks are we willing to take in that vein? Does that make sense, Commissioner?
Well, I still don't believe we need to take taxpayers' general fund money that they're using from their property tax to tell people that there's an election coming up.
It is definitely an expensive endeavor.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Commissioner Meister has just joined us. He had a doctor's appointment this morning. Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry I was late.
Thank you.
Ready for the bell discussion? Okay, Andrew?
Morning, Andrew. You briefed us on this before. We didn't come up with a decision. We've got an ugly thing sitting out front, so hopefully we can figure out what to do with this ugly thing that we've got out front.
That's right. Good morning, Commissioners. Andrew Diltz, Director of Facilities. I'd also like to take a moment to introduce Paul Kavanaugh in the back. Paul, if you'd give a wave. He's our new Project Services Manager and helped shave approximately 10% off of one of our options here. So I will try to be brief on this and get us through the end of this here fairly quickly. So we do have a couple pictures here of our current bell tower in front of the main courthouse. The history of the bell tower, it was presented to the county in 1890 when the historic courthouse across the street was constructed. It was mounted in the top of the historic courthouse. And then in 1953, a storm hit, causing severe damage to the structure of that bell tower and clock tower on top of the historic courthouse. About a year later, in 1954, the bell was removed from the historic courthouse, and in 1959, the bell was set in its current location in front of the main courthouse. Here is a before and after picture of the bell tower and the clock tower on top of the main courthouse. Here it is before, and here it is as it sits today with the bell tower removed. At its current location, there is an engraving in the stone, and the engraving reads, in the year 1890, this bell was hoisted into a clock tower atop the old Sedgwick County Courthouse east of this location by the people of Sedgwick County, thus symbolizing their faith in the knowledge that free and independent courts are essential to a free and independent people, and both are essential to justice. So, to fast forward to how we got to where we are today, at the end of last year, we noticed some structural damage to the top of the bell tower, and we had it evaluated by a structural engineer, and they recommended that we remove the stone, evaluate the steel underneath it, and they presented us with plans to add additional steel, refurbish the existing steel, and reconstruct the bell tower to its, restore it to its original condition. So we've come up with a few scenarios here. The option one, the first scenario, this is the one that Paul helped us reduce the cost on. This is the only one that's changed in cost since the last time, Commissioners, you saw this. This is to rebuild the bell tower to its original condition and refurbish the bell for approximately $221,000. Option 2 would be to leave the bell in place, leave the tower that supports the bell, and remove the other remaining towers. So I have a red box here on what we would actually remove, and I have a picture to the right of that on what it would look like afterwards. We would essentially cap the wall right here at the bottom of that red line, and the towers above it would be removed, and then this tower would be rebuilt. And this does not include refurbishing the bell. Option 3 would be to remove the bell and all the towers, cap the wall, so it would look like the picture to the right. Placement of the bell would be determined. We do have a price to build a display that would elevate the bell over at Historic Courthouse or at any given location that we would choose. This option is for just over $19,000 to remove everything and cap the wall. We would add almost $90,000 to place the bell at Historic Courthouse or build a display somewhere else. This would turn that project into just under $109,000. And then option 4 would be to remove the bell and all the towers and the wall down to the flower bed and just create a flower bed in this location that would be similar to the other flower beds in front of the main courthouse. This option is just over $23,000. And again, we could come up with a spot to or future placement of the bell, whether that's at Historic Courthouse or another location. That would essentially turn this project into $113,000 if we went through with that option. And I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Questions? Oh, go ahead with comments.
Wow, who knew this was going to be so expensive? I think there is value in preserving the history of this bell. And I think there is value in preserving the history of our courthouse and where we are today. In my humble opinion, I'm a little shocked at the display of the bell and the cost that it would be to put it somewhere else, say a glass case inside the courthouse, but obviously I haven't done any work to see what the cost of this is. So it would be my opinion that we should do option 2, as it would preserve, where the bell is sitting right now. And I do think it's important to recognize why it's there and have a visible way to showcase that. Also, it does create some barrier between the road and our building. So bollards that would be put in place, we have talked about that as a security measure for our courthouse. I think that is an important thing because it's already there and it does act that. It also provides shade. For yesterday when I came in, there were a ton of people outside around this. So I would not want to remove this as in, I think it was option 4. So out of all of these, in my opinion, that was probably the best one and what looks like the most cost-effective option to preserve the history around the bell. Thank you.
Commissioner Meitzner?
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for all the work on this, but I didn't realize, I had kind of thought, let's just mothball it and figure when times are different. But I didn't realize that on your slide, whatever it is, where it says what's in this, what the reading, there you go. So that last half that says knowledge that free and independent courts are essential to free and independent people, and since this will be a true courthouse now, and it's not really a commissioner bell, it's more of about dedicating the courts. So I tend to lean in agreement that's preserving it somehow, and option 2 seems to be a best cost to try to keep it in place a little bit. That's just how I lean right now.
Andrew, let me ask you a question. How many times has this wall that's out there in existence right now, how many times has it been defaced with graffiti?
I don't know that I have a good number on that. I know that we currently have graffiti on the bell itself. The wall, I'm not sure of. There are lights that are around the wall that get broken on a fairly regular basis. If I had to guess, I would say probably a handful of times throughout the year.
Well, I kind of like option 3, except for the fact that you say it's going to cost me $89,000 to place the bell over at the historic courthouse, and that's the figure that I'm concerned about, is that $89,000. I don't know why we can't clean that bell up if it gets a little bit of graffiti on it. Why does it have to be elevated where nobody can touch it? Why can't we pour a piece of concrete down in front of this, take the top off like you show in option 3, and just set this thing down on the ground?
Yeah, I think we can do whatever the will of the commission is. I don't know that you have a bell like that that's within reach. I don't know if people are going to start bringing hammers and sounding the bell whenever they want to, or I really don't know. I will speak to Commissioner Cruz reminded me, we did ask an engineering firm to look at the possibility of relocating the bell inside the main courthouse lobby in the front entrance. And we'll have to do additional studies, but it sounds like it might be possible depending on the location that we put. If we wanted to relocate it inside the courthouse, which I would anticipate that $89,000 to be significantly less, since we wouldn't have it elevated and it would have courthouse security right next to it.
Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on one slide, it talks about if you remove this down to the flower bed, we're in it for $24,000, $23,000 and change, no matter what. That's the least expensive option, just to get rid of all that stuff that's vertical above the flower bed.
19,250 is option 3. Is cheaper.
Okay. Now back. Okay. So I would like to see us do that primarily for cost savings, but I do think that the Welcome Center downstairs, I don't see we're ever going to have someone standing there in the lobby like we used to have for decades. I think that era is behind us. So I think we ought to reuse that space. Let's take out that Welcome Center and bring that inside. I think that the inscription there with that bell, where people can actually touch it in the courthouse. It's very historic. It stands for wonderful history. What it says exactly on that inscription is still extremely relevant. And if you bring it inside the courthouse, it even means even more. People get their pictures with it, and on it goes. I think it has importance, but bringing it inside the lobby by getting rid of that Welcome Center is a tremendous place to go and see something historic, and it's the least expensive option. I actually would like to see us ask some of our community businesses if who would like to step up, and we will take these two things, create a display, and have that, if you will, donated by X company, or refurbished by or placed by such a company, and they get them a namesake in our building. To me, I think that we ask a community to do that. I think someone will step up and want that opportunity. So I think we ought to be a little bit open to changing some stuff, but I think bringing that inside the building, it's safe. By the way, there is one of these on the third floor of maybe it's the second floor of the state capitol, and I've rung that bell. It's fun, but it doesn't disturb people too much. And the reality is, it's good. It's good for the public, and they can see it and touch it. It's not quite as big as this bell, but there's really no reason why this can't be down on the ground where people can touch it, especially with security right there. I think that bringing this inside the building is the right option. It's the least expensive cost to the taxpayer, and it has the best, I think, experience for the citizens. So, to me, I'm very convinced that's the right answer. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Well, again, I like option 3 up to a point. I don't like the 89,000. We need to find something that we can bring it down lower than that. And if there's a possibility of bringing it inside someplace that's a lot cheaper than 89,000, I'd be interested in that. Commissioner Meitzner.
Yeah, I was just looking at the options, but I think Commissioner Howell's got a good point. And could you bring it back? What would it take to put it in the lobby area and somehow maybe even save the inscription and display?
Absolutely, I can. I think what I'm currently seeking right now is really what we want to do with the exterior, and then we can certainly evaluate any options on where we want to place the bell. But if that's going to impact whether or not we move forward with one of these options on leaving the bell out there or bringing the bell in, that's kind of what I'm looking for at this time.
Commissioner Cruz.
So when we first met, Tanya and Commissioner Lopez and the four of us met, that was the original idea that I asked to have brought. And so, of course, I'm going to want to see that option. So when we talked about it initially, I guess I'm a little shocked that we didn't do that.
I received an email late yesterday from the structural engineer saying that it's possible that we can put this bell on the main courthouse lobby, but it depends on the placement and whether or not we're over a structural beam that can support it, because if we're not over a structural beam, the front lobby won't support it.
Okay. So when will you be bringing this back? When will we see if we'll be able to structurally do that? And then what will it take, because that roundabout or the round desk, I mean, that will have to be factored in too, as far as the construction of where it will go in the courthouse.
I'm disappointed in how long it took structural to get back to me yesterday, but I would anticipate probably 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay, great. Thank you for your work on this, appreciate it.
Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I guess my vision is it's down at where people can touch it and be standing in front of it. And to me, I don't want it under glass. I really don't want it elevated. I just like it to be down close to the ground. And so I imagine some type of a weldment that would designed to hold the weight that people could stand in front of, and it would be, a very good experience for them. So again, I don't think it needs to be up off the ground or behind glass. I think it needs to be touched. And so again, I think it's the least expensive option, and I envision some type of weldment that would basically hold this up off the floor. So I'm not sitting right on the floor, but bring it up off the floor, 3 or 4 feet, and let people touch it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Andrew, it sounds like option 3 with trying to figure out a permanent placement of the bell is what the majority of the commissioners have kind of given you guidance. If you can come back with the bottom bullet on the placement of the bell.
Tanya, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I was just going to ask exactly what Chairman Dennis just stated. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Andrew? I don't see anything. Anything for other commissioners?
That was all staff had, sir.
Say that again?
That's all staff had for today.
Okay, good. I've got one thing that I'd like to bring up for everyone. At a recent staff meeting, I mentioned that we have numerous budget problems that we're moving into in 2023 and beyond, and that it's imperative that we look at different ways of doing business that brings more efficiencies for our citizens. Last week, Treasurer Brandy Bailey, Register of Deeds Tanya Buckingham, County Clerk Kelly Arnold, and I met to discuss this critical issue. We all agree that a study of their operations to include the appraiser's office and GIS, since those offices are the first steps in the process, may result in the elimination of duplication of services or considerations for methods or procedures to provide service delivery in a more efficient, cost-effective manner. However, each of those officers are currently involved in a move of all of their administrative functions from the courthouse over to the Ruffin Building. Therefore, any study should not be conducted until after that move is completed and their operations return to normal. In addition, each mentioned that a study could identify opportunities that will streamline services to their community as the new administrative building is designed and new software is developed. As a result, any contract for the study will be in a partnership with each of these offices, and the results will be provided directly to the Treasurer, Register of Deeds, and the County Clerk for their action as necessary later this year. And then as a result of that meeting that I had with them last week, I did get a letter signed by Kelly Arnold, County Clerk, Tanya Buckingham, Register of Deeds, and Brandy Bailey, County Treasurer. And it says, Chairman Dennis, as Sedgwick County elected officials, our duty is to serve the citizens to the best of our ability in a manner that respects the value of the taxpayers' dollars. In our meeting with you, the purpose and goal of contracting with a consulting firm was outlined to explore the efficiencies and offices of the County Clerk, Register of Deeds, County Clerk, and County Treasurer. We welcome any opportunity to uncover fresh ideas for ways to provide even better customer service to our citizens. We all agree that they deserve only the best while we continue to perform our statutory duties. Thank you all. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that update. And again, I think since we have some time, I would like to see that kind of go through a normal process. Develop a scope or a mission for the study, bring it to commissioners for some discussion and hopefully some type of resolution and a vote to move this forward in some kind of normal process. I think that there was some effort to expedite this quickly before this update because there's a general election deadline. It had to be, the ballot question would have to be delivered to the election office by September 1st. That clearly isn't the timeline now. And so I guess my point is we have some time. So if we're going to do this, please, if you will, develop a proposal. The scope of this study should be understood. I think the commissioners ought to weigh in a little bit and have some discussion about it. We have to vote on it so that we have a study that comes back with the information we feel like we need to make decisions moving forward. Thank you.
I have a question.
Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. So what was the discussion around these offices hiring and their outside counsel? Mike Papoon, can you address that question?
Yeah, about a week ago or so, when there was some concern that the commission was going to perhaps look at eliminating the offices or consolidating offices, Kelly Arnold, and on behalf of the other row elected officials, asked that they get some independent legal advice. And since our office represents all of these three different elected offices, and I have been advising commissioners on this issue, it only made sense that they would get their own legal counsel if they had questions related to that. Now, since that time, since the meeting with the chairman, that's no longer necessary because it doesn't look like the commission as a whole is in conflict with the elected offices. So that's where it stands right now, is they're not getting their own lawyer on this thing.
So what is the timeline then?
We haven't come up with the final contract yet. We have a Zoom meeting scheduled for about the third week of July where all of the elected officials and their deputies and I think Brent Shelton and I and anybody else from the county that's involved with this is going to talk with the consultants from Baker Tilly and talk about timelines and talk about scope of work and some of the things that were mentioned by Commissioner Howe. That's coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay, so how will commissioners be communicated to regarding the timeline of this, regarding your meeting with this organization? How will that happen?
Well, after I assume it'll be through the manager, would be the one communicating with commissioners on this, although we can. This was originally intended just to go through the manager's office. The amount of the contract is within his authority to do. There's a will, I think, on the part of commissioners, at least in individual discussions, to look at efficiencies like this. The manager has the authority, so we were just going to develop a contract for the manager to sign, and then that contract can be shown to you. It can be shown to you before it's signed by the manager. It's up to the manager here to how he wants to conduct that.
But again, during the discussions with the row offices, we promised them that they would have input to the contract because it's their offices. They're more familiar with it than any one of the five of us. They're more vested in the outcomes to make sure that they're serving their citizens well. So out of all of the people in this building that I think have more interest in what that contract says, it's the treasurer, county clerk, and the register of deeds.
I'm not disagreeing that. I'm asking for the procedure in which we are going to handle this, and I'm asking for, you guys say the majority of commissioners, but I haven't heard from either of my two colleagues at the end of this table, how they feel. We've not taken a formal vote. I have not heard from every single commissioner on this, and so how are you making your determination that a majority of commissioners support this? That's my question around, I've not heard from all commissioners, and if you have, then I think it's time that we all discuss this as to what is the best way to move forward. This is a procedure thing. That's what I'm asking for, is to have the procedure transparent as possible so that the public knows what's going on. Because just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, it was, we're going to do this, and now all of a sudden, we're not going to do this.
As I said earlier, procedurally, the county manager doesn't need your permission, or we do not need a vote to go ahead with this study. Now, if he wants to do that, he typically on projects like this will bring it to your attention in a public meeting, which he did a few weeks ago, and which we're doing today. And it's entirely up to him if he wants to have this for a formal vote to give him authority he already has. And that's for you to direct county manager on how you want to handle this. I mean, you can usurp that authority from him if you'd like, but I think he and I are just generally going from private discussions we've had, commissioners, and what we feel like the mood of the commission is, and I think he feels he has that authority right now to proceed forward. But if you want to ask all 5 commissioners whether the manager should have that authority, we could do that this morning. There's no need for a formal vote because procedurally, he doesn't need your blessing for this.
Well, you have mentioned that a majority of commissioners are, that's what you say, and now you're saying that you've talked with commissioners behind closed doors. So it's either there is a majority or there isn't a majority, and I think that's important for the public to understand. That's what I'm asking for.
Okay, any other commissioners? Commissioner Meitzner?
Yeah, I early on when this was talked about, I respected that it falls under the jurisdiction and the purview of the manager, and I remember telling Tom at one time, I said, we've got 42 departments or whatever it is, 46, and he can choose the efficiency on many departments, and we don't go through this kind of discussion on if he chooses to look at one department or another. But I respect what he wants to do, and if chairman negotiated or talked with them, and if Tom determines this is the manager determines this is the way he does it, I respect that. So.
I agree.
Commissioner Howell?
I understand he has the authority, and I agree that that's normal, but I think when commissioners weigh in on a topic, then I think that the manager would be reasonable for him to kind of get a consensus on where we're headed. If we speak to an issue, I think it'd be unlikely you would just disregard that thought. I think you'd want to find out what commissioners think. If we've already weighed in somewhat, we have an opinion on this topic. Could you do it legally? Yeah, you sure can. But I think that now we've spoken to this. There is some controversy here. There is some opinion. I think there are some issues that are well below $50,000 we've had much debate over. And to the extent you do this, if you're being directed by a commissioner, that's different than you making a decision on your own. If you feel like a commissioner is directing you to spend money, that to me is more concerning than you feel like this is the right thing to do personally. And you made a decision to manage your office, and you have the authority to spend that money up to $50,000. So to me, I don't know if you personally have an opinion on this and you wanted to say, I'm wanting to choose to spend this money because I think it's the right thing to do, or are you doing it to make a commissioner happy, or to please the direction of one commissioner? I would just say this. I said this a couple weeks ago when this came up. Fundamentally, these are executive offices. This is a form of government. We have, if you wanted to ask the sheriff and say, we'd like to do an efficiency study, I'm not sure he'd really want us doing that. He's an executive. He runs his office. The people have elected him, and if they don't think he's doing a good job, they'll vote for someone else. And that is how it goes. And so the boss in these offices is the people. The electors is who chooses who runs these positions. Runs these positions. If there's inefficiencies, then their challengers would let the people know that, or they'll determine that on their own. But regardless, these elected offices are executive positions. I would like it if they would be receptive to our ideas, and we'd like to suggest some things we think are important. But ultimately, the decisions on these offices lies in their decision authority because they are executive offices. And so fundamentally, this is the form of government that I support. And I think that for us to even toy with this, for the idea that we're going to consolidate or whatever, this is a fundamental question. And I guess I have a strong opinion about whether we should go down this path. Do I think there's efficiencies? If they welcome efficiency studies and they want to use the information and they're receptive to that, that's fantastic. But I would just like to say, they need to call the shots. And at the end of the day, if they don't want to have the efficiency study, they're the executives. It's their office. It's like I was telling the sheriff, you're going to do this. I don't know that we should or could do that. And I don't think we ought to play with the idea, or the district attorney for that matter. So at the end of the day, are there inefficiencies? I think in government everywhere there's inefficiencies. We could look at ourselves. We've got 42 agencies under the manager. If you want to look at any agency, I'm sure you can find efficiency opportunities. So to focus on these specifically is, to me, is somewhat offensive almost. At the end of the day, if Tom, you want to go forward and spend the money for this thing, it's $150,000, you have the authority. But now that we've weighed in on this, I think you ought to get 3 commissioners who support the idea if we're going to go forward. That's why I said, develop a scope of work. I'd like to talk to the row office leaders, the elected officials, and find out what they think and make sure that they're supportive of whatever the scope of work is. I want to make sure the numbers make sense. So what do we expect out of these studies? If the result is we're moving towards appointed positions versus elected positions, I think it's a non-starter for me, if that's where this is headed. So anyway, I think we have a lot to talk about if we're going to go down this path. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Lopez.
Thank you. I think to argue the point that government is inefficient as a unit, and so we shouldn't look at how to be more efficient and effective with the taxpayer dollars that we have in a certain department is not a very good argument. We do look at efficiencies and how we can be more effective with the money that we have, just in general. So I think it is a good thing to look at this in all departments. And I don't know if we've looked at this in these 3 in particular, and have we ever looked at that? I think it's a good idea to look at how we can be more effective with taxpayer monies, because that's our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. And we actually had a very, very good discussion last Thursday. And they are interested in looking at their organization, and they're interested in getting the report back to them so that they can take a look at what they can do in the future. They mentioned software that goes through the process. It starts with GIS and the appraiser. It comes over to each of their different departments. How can the software be streamlined in order to be able to make them more efficient? They mentioned the new admin building. When someone comes into their offices, do they need to go from one building to another? Or can they have someone, say, a member of the appraiser's office located in the new admin building that can answer questions immediately, and then they go over and work through the different row offices? I appreciate their willingness to work and to get some kind of a study done for not only the 3 row offices, but also 2 that are the appraiser's kind of under us, not quite, and the GIS, which is part of Sedgwick County. So that's what they're interested in doing, the same thing that we're interested in doing, and that's making sure that we're efficient and effective on serving the community. And that's what the entire intention of this study is for those 5 different divisions. Okay, I don't see anything else. Anything else, Mr. Manager?
I do want to comment now.
Sure.
Thank you for the conversation. I think the move forward, to get back to whoever asked the technical question or process, let's do the meeting, the Zoom meeting that Mike referred to. I think I have no problem reporting that back to commission. I report to you when we buy a table at an event somewhere. It's a $700 investment. I tell you what we're doing. I have no problem reporting back to commission. I do think it is important, and I've had some discussion with some of their offices, and I was there when Mr. Dennis met with them. I think it's important that whatever the deliverable is goes back to them. I don't know that it goes to me, or I don't know that it goes to the commission. I think it goes back to them as the elected executives, as Commissioner Howell brought up. And we do this a lot in county government. We're always, every time we do a budget, in November and December and January of the year before we're going to have the discussion, we're looking at efficiencies and consolidations and migrations and transfers and things that we can do differently to be as smart as we can with the people's money. Once in a while, we will hire an outside entity to come in and look at a department or division that's highly complex and give us an outside view looking in on efficiency. We've done this a half a dozen times since I've been a manager, and the managers before me did it as well. This is not unusual. To Commissioner Lopez's question, I don't know that it's been done in row offices. I don't know that the row offices are averse to this. I think, as the chairman has said, they're interested in efficiencies. But after the meeting, I have no problem bringing that back to staff. I have no problem bringing it back to a meeting. I think you guys should hear it, should be knowledgeable of it, to see the scope, and then we move it forward. But from that point forward, those results, those deliverables go back to those offices.
But before it comes back to us, we agreed that they would be able to work with legal on drafting the scope of work, the contract, that they're the drivers on making sure that this is what is going to meet their needs, and that the report would come back to their 3 offices, and we can get a copy of it, but it really goes back to them.
I have a follow-up question. So, in looking at other governments who have taken the step to modernize the way they do business, Johnson County has done this. And so, what was the process in how they decided? Because giving someone the scope of work to come and look over your own office, it's kind of like investigating yourself. And I don't like to use that word, but I'm not real sure what other word to use. So I think it's important that we look for best practices on other ways that governments have modernized their efficiencies, so that we can learn from them and do it sort of with a objective view of how the office is run.
I'll let Mike talk to what Joko did, but
Yeah, part of the contract with Baker Tilly is to look at the Johnson County model, look at models from other cities and counties. Wyandotte County is a little bit different than Johnson County. In Wyandotte County, they eliminated their treasurer and clerk, I believe, but still have an elected register of deeds. Every urban county does things a little bit different, and certainly one of the things this consultant is going to do in working with our elected officials is talking about how things might work better if they did something like maybe as Johnson County's doing, maybe work more towards a one-stop shop in certain areas. And I was in the meeting too with the chairman and the county manager, and I think our three elected officials are very open to looking at some of these things, and I think they all 3 get along really well, which is encouraging, which you don't always have with these elected officials. So I think we're going to be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish there. They're not just investigating how our offices work, they're looking at how other offices work as well.
I do think it's kind of suspect, though, after the announcement was made from this table, and then a conversation with these 3 offices contracting their own counsel, and now all of a sudden the tune has changed. So that to me is a little suspect, and so I'd like to point that out. Thank you for that opportunity.
Well, I don't see that had any bearing whatsoever. When they came in and spoke with us, one of their biggest concerns is we're in the middle of a move right now. There were a lot of timelines that would have to be met if we were trying to get this before the people and to put it to a vote. If you go over to the Ruffin Building right now, you'll see that 2 of the locations are totally tore up. They're not anywhere near ready to move in. To try and do any kind of an analysis at a time when they're working out of temporary facilities, then trying to pack and move into a new facility, this is not the time to disrupt their operations even more by saying we're going to try and do an analysis of your operation when their operation is totally in turmoil currently because of the move. So there's a good reason we needed to put this off. We could not force them into this short timeline, and they still do their job.
But Chairman, with all due respect, you knew that the move was happening before you announced this. So I don't understand why now all of us are moving. All of us are needing to meet deadlines. So.
But none of us are having a study done.
Again,
we're all moving.
You knew that they were moving when you announced the need to do this before. I'm just wondering what has changed the tune, and I wonder if it was the fact that people are going to lawyer up. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Anything else, Mr. Manager? Very good. We're adjourned. Thank you all.